Let's begin our subject of absolute value equations. So let's recall the definition of this function. So we put two bars around x to denote the absolute value. What does this do to my input? Well, the rule is rather simple. If my input is not a negative number, that is, if x is greater than or equal to 0, I don't do anything to it. But if it is a negative number, then I output negative x. Another way of thinking of this is I switch negatives to positives, and I leave positives alone. So this is nice. This is a rule for how the absolute value function works. We can also think of it pictorially. We can try to plot this function in the Cartesian plane. So I'll draw a pair of axes. And a few hash marks to help my plotting. So for positive values of x, it looks just like the function f of x equals x. So 1, the absolute value of 1 is 1, the absolute value of 2 is 2, 3 is 3. So over here, I just get a nice line. For negative values of x, it looks quite different. Negative 1 goes to 1, negative 2 goes to positive 2, negative 3 goes to positive 3. So over here, our plot looks like f of x equals negative x. So I get this nice V-shaped that is very typical of absolute value functions. So this is f of x equals absolute value x. Of course, I can do all sorts of things to this basic atom graph, right? I can add it to things. I can translate it, multiply it by a constant. So just for example, I could have it sort of be centered at negative 2 instead of at 0. And this is the plot f of x equals absolute value x plus 2. In our next module, in module 3, we'll look at how to generally translate a function. But I think it's helpful just to look at this for the absolute value. So I'll make a remark that the absolute value of x is always greater than or equal to 0. i.e., absolute value x is never negative. One interpretation for this is that the absolute value of x is the distance of x to the origin, to 0. Since distances are never negative, it makes sense that the absolute value should never be negative. Now that we've had a nice introduction to the absolute value, we'll look at equations and inequalities governed by it.